In tonight's Dateline Defense, suspending JLENS. After a multi-million-dollar military blimp broke free at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, the program has been under scrutiny. Now the Pentagon has halted the program pending further investigation. For insight, we turn to our guest tonight on Capitol Insider, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer. He's a CIA-trained senior intelligence operations officer, best-selling author, and senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Tony, before we get into the suspension, let's discuss the program itself. Now, JLENS was intended to serve as an early warning radar system to protect the country from missiles, drones, or low-flying weapons. But after 2 decades of development and billions of dollars in federal funding, many lawmakers and some Pentagon officials complain it doesn't work. What's your take on JLENS? Does the threat level match the money being spent?
No, it doesn't. This has never worked well. I first was familiar with this back in the mid-90s when I was working counter-drug down in Key West. Morris, one of the issues during the war on drugs was in the transit zone, the sea between Colombia and the United States. Low-flying aircraft were clearly a problem, and this was developed as part of that war on drugs.
Exactly, yep.
And then this has been used when I was in Afghanistan. These things hung over Bagram looking for threats, and they had, instead of radar, optical payloads looking for insurgents in the mountains. You know what? They never caught the insurgents coming out of the mountains. So these things have been in development, as you stipulate, for over 20 years, and they've just never worked.
You know, seeing the shot we just saw of an Amish buggy and the high-tech blimp, but the blimp wasn't working, and that buggy still does. It's
works
just
very
incredible.
Well. That's right.
All right, last week, one of the blimps broke free, as we know, and traveled north to Pennsylvania, taking down power lines in its wake. Now the Pentagon has suspended the program. Is this the right call, Tony, and are there other systems in place that could be more effective in detecting airborne threats?
Low-flying aircraft, small one-man things are always going to be a challenge. They've been experimenting with a number of different ways. The honest answer is there's no way, Morris, to cover every inch of airspace regarding small diameter aircraft.
Well, look at the mailman on the gyrocopter.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point. So I think we have to look at what we can do. This thing was not doing its job. It was not doing that. And basically, there's all sorts of technical problems, as we've seen here. This thing is supposed to be able to sustain 100-knot winds. Morris, I don't think there was 100-knot winds the day this thing broke through.
Not at
all.
all.
I think we have to recognize that the investment and return are not in balance.
All right, let's switch gears, Tony, to the Russian Metrojet crash in Egypt. The U.S. has warned Americans to stay away from the Sinai Peninsula region, pending a full investigation. Now, since then, the United Kingdom has announced a small explosive may have caused the plane to go down, and they've grounded all of their flights out of the region. Does the U.K. know something we don't?
Well, look, I went on record 2 nights ago predicting this is what happened. So I'd like to believe I'm on track on believing that the UK knows something that we all kind of speculated on. There's no doubt in my mind, Morris, that something brought that aircraft down. It was not mechanical. The debris pattern, if you look at it carefully, even in the pictures, you can tell it's kind of a Lockerbie, Scotland type pattern. And I hate to bring that image back to those Americans who lost family members in an attack back in the 80s, but this is what it looks like. It looks like a mid-air bombing. There's absolutely no evidence that ISIS has high-tech weapons that could reach from the ground, a surface-to-air missile, to reach 30,000 feet. In absence of that, in absence of technical failures, you got to go with the human-emplaced weapon, which would be someone, an individual compromising the on-the-ground security, either a suicide bomber or some security person or
well, they're talking to the food services people, the people that bring the food on.
That's right.
You know, in the back of the plane, when really anybody could have smuggled something on.
So I think that's the most likely vector for the attack, and I think the precautions that everybody's taking, to include the United States, are warranted at this point.
All right, we've talked about speculation that the Russian jet was retaliation by ISIS, that the crash from Moscow getting involved in Syria. Now Al-Qaeda is calling for attacks on Russia. Secretary of State John Kerry warned this could happen. Has the Islamic State set its sights on Russia?
Well, they have, and I think this is not all bad. I mean, look, we've been at war with the Islamic world, the radicals, for the past 15 years. The radicals are the issue here. And as much as we have solid Arab allies who are Muslim, there are the radical elements which we now can focus on, I'd like to believe, with the Russians. I mean, this is the one area of overlap between our two nations. Radical Islam, especially ISIS at this point. So this may be a wake-up call for Russia and for us, frankly, to try to come together to work on issues which we agree upon, and defeating ISIS is one of those.
Tony, that brings me to this next point.
Sure.
Do you see the Cold War thawing between Russia and the U.S. if we partner with them in Syria, but at the same time, could this lead to more terror attacks?
I think this is a good beginning. The new Cold War has been coming for a while. This is a global issue. This goes everything from the Arctic, exploration of the Arctic resources, to Crimea, all the things in between. Russia is looking at what it can do to reestablish the old Soviet empire.
Right.
With that said, this is the one area of cooperation, and let me tell you, I've talked to folks at the Pentagon, Morris. We are doing everything we can to cooperate within the realm to do two things: to prevent fratricide of killing the Russians or them killing us, and doing what we can to include even quietly sharing intelligence information about ISIS. Russia said, hey, we can't hit ISIS targets if we don't know where they are.
Exactly.
We can't stop from hitting yours if we don't know where they are. So I think there's some level of cooperation now ongoing.
Just a reminder to our audience, you can catch Tony at the Spy Museum for Stealth Eye for the Spy, Thursday starting at 6 p.m. It's a great event. We've talked about it before. Be there, everybody, if you can. In the meantime, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer, Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Thanks, Tony.
Sure. Thanks for having me.